Even though it's been a bizarre year for the bike industry, there's still been some really cool tech popping up. And actually, we've been lucky enough to get to a few shows this year and see some of this stuff in the flesh. Now, in this video, I'm going to be showing you a load of the most strange tech we've seen over the year. Now, none of this is bad. This is all just alternative stuff. In my eyes, is some of the most interesting stuff we've seen in 2021. Okay, first up is the Kindenae Gearbox Hub. Now, this is an incredible piece of kit. Now, in the past, we've seen gearbox bikes, well, currently as well, and we've seen gearbox hubs as well. Shimano have had the Nexus, which we tended to see on more commuter biased bikes, and then the roll-off hub, which has 14 gears on the inside and weighs about 1,700 grams. But this Kindenae hub is slightly lighter, it's 1,400 grams. It's a 14-speed hub and it has a few very cool things going on. Should be some shots of it coming up. And probably the first thing you're going to notice is the fact that the hub can be removed from the flanges. So in a hub design, you have the flanges, which have the holes which attach to the spokes. The centre of the hub can be removed from that wheel, leaving the laced up flanges on there, meaning you can fully service that hub off the bike. Now, this is a great concept and also means you're going to be able to move it between bicycles as well. It's obviously an expensive piece of kit, but they want to keep using it. Well, they want you to keep using this across your bikes. The aim is for it to outlast your current bike. Now, it has 14 speeds on there, and they're saying it has a 543% gear range between those. Now, just to give you an example, SRAM 12-speed cassette with a 1052, that's a 520% gear range. So obviously you've got two more gears on there, with 13.9% intervals between those gears, so a good sort of consistent range there. The roll-off one, by the way, has 13.6% between those gears, and it weighs, sorry, there's a 526% gear range, and it weighs 1,680. I said 1,700, but pretty close. It fits both 142 and Boost 148mm hubs. It's got 24 points of engagement on there, and probably my favourite thing, if it wasn't already the fact you can remove the hub from the shell, is the hydraulic shifter on there. Now, this is just a beautiful thing to use. Now, I did have a little go on the bike. It was indoors in a hangar in the Zeppelin Hall at Friedrichshafen for Eurobike, but you could still get an idea of how it worked. Really responsive, really light touch, but you really knew when it was going to engage. You could sort of feel it in the same way using a cable shifter. It wasn't vague. You could definitely feel that gear changing. Instant changing, under pressure. You could change gear when you freewheel. You could change gear when you're pedaling. Under pressure, didn't matter. I think it's a really cool system. Now, a slight downside you might be thinking is, from the gearbox video I recently made, we're talking about moving the weight from the hub to the middle of the bike. Yeah, that's a desirable thing. However, if you want something that's just mega reliable and it fits on your existing bike, this has got you covered. I think it's a beautiful piece of tech and it seems to work really well. Active5 bicycles, wow. I mean, they've made some beautiful looking bikes. They've had this steel front end with the alloy rear end, but it's this, the P-Train, that really steals the show for me, with a CNC machined front end and the back end as well, in fact, and the whole thing is a combination of bonded and bolted together. But just look at the thing, it is absolutely stunning. Very progressive geometry on the bike. It's running a high pivot system there, and it's also got a whole bunch of other cool stuff on the bike as well. Now, it's one of the more exciting brands we've seen over the year. You might notice there's some really cool stuff from Intend floating on some of these bikes here on shot as well. Now, one of these things to go along with the rearward axle path associated with the high pivot design on this bike is this special looking Intend fork. Now, this is an inverted fork, but look at where the fork crowns are. It's almost got what looks like a reverse offset. It's essentially to change the angle of the fork without changing the head tube angle of the bike there. So the angle of the fork is more in line with the bump force of the rear wheel. So essentially it's like a high pivot fork, if that makes sense. Looks bizarre, but I bet it feels incredible when you're riding into crazy stuff. And Cornelius behind Intend, he's a smart guy and he's really looking forward at things like this. So I think it's an amazing piece of kit. Now also, Cornelius, when we were looking at the Active5 bike, he also showed us his own bike, which was a Last, which I think you can see on screen now. And on here, he had a set of their cranks. Now, the crank's called the Rocksteady, but there's two versions. There's the regular and there's the Magic crank, which he showed us, which has a freewheel on the crank itself. Now, it relies on having a fixed hub at the rear end. Well, actually, he zip-tied the spokes to the sprocket at the rear. And the idea behind that is if there's any failure in the system, the cable tie breaks, not anything else. And what it means is essentially you're having the chain constantly moves around. So you've got constant chain tension, so chain's far less likely to come off, but also you can change gears without pedaling, which is super, super cool. Now, I was a little bit worried thinking, oh, there's going to be loads of friction in that, but you're reducing the friction here, and as long as the bearings are good in the crank, which they certainly were in this one, it's amazing. So it's got 47 points of engagement as well on there. It's a really cool system. I'd love to feel what that is like in use, although I think, again, total recalibration. When I rode that gearbox bike, the Starling, recently with the FE gear on there, it took me so long to get used to the fact that you could change gear without pedaling, you could preempt. Yeah, of course, you're going to dial into that, and actually you probably get really good at using it in situations, maybe rocketing downhill and coming into an uphill switchback. Being able to sort of preempt that, be in the right gear without crunching through them. Brilliant system. I love stuff like this. Awesome. Suntour prototype electronic suspension. Now, prototype anything is always cool to see, but especially when it's on an Olympic champion's bike. So this bike you can see here was Tom Pidcock's winning bike. It's a BMC underneath all this. I think it's a 4-stroke. So full suspension, quite progressive frame to be honest anyway. And he's using Suntour suspension. So I was looking at the suspension on there and you could see some cables, and you could see some wires, stuff going on. And it's got prototype electronic actuated suspension. So in a similar vein to what SRAM have done with the flight attendant with RockShox, and in a similar vein to what Fox have done with the live valve system, I'm guessing Suntour are going down the same route. Now, the technicians would neither confirm or deny when I asked them the questions. They would kind of just give me a sort of bit of a nod. So basically they're insinuating that yes, it has some kind of sensor-based system, perhaps accelerometers in the fork to measure the bump force and adjust damping accordingly. But this is really exciting. So it's not just Fox, it's not just RockShox doing this, there's another player, which means if Suntour's doing it, there's going to be more people getting involved. I love it, and obviously it's proven. It's got an Olympic champion on it. Doesn't get much cooler than that, does it? And with that, we should move on to the SRAM RockShox Flight Attendant, because it's a really, really cool and interesting piece of kit. Now, before I talk about this, let's just go back to 2013 when RockShox released the EI system that they worked in conjunction with a few different brands. One of them was Lapierre, that's the one that I rode. And it was an electronic system, essentially. It had little mini servo motors on the shock there to adjust the damping based on an impact from the fork, and that was measured and it would adjust the damping before the impact got to the rear wheel. So a really, really cool system, but it was just a bit too early. Like, it worked brilliantly, the ones I rode, and you'd hear the shock like making loads of micro adjustments way faster than you ever could. Faster than a blink, really. Super, super cool stuff. But it wasn't quite ready for mass market and it was too specific at the time. However, the flight attendant system looks genius. So they've already given us the access system, so we've already got wireless shifting that's completely customizable with the different touch points, and you've got the wireless access dropper post. No cables in sight. Super clean, really nice to use, super easy to set up. If you break a mech by any bad chance, pop it off, put another one on, good to go. No adjustment needed. Really easy to set up, loads of cool stuff. But how do you maximise on a wireless system? Well, you want to add to the system, you want to add to that family. So you do that by having a flight attendant on there. So that has a sensor in the bottom bracket shell, so obviously that's another battery. You have a motor basically controlling damping adjustments on the shock, and the same for the fork, and then all the sensors that control that. And you've got the module on the top of the fork there that applies the actual damping. Now there's loads of different settings. You can do manual, you can have a damping bias, so it will be in control of, say, a more firm feeling ride, so you can have it better for a more cross-country based ride, or a more open feeling ride. So you're completely in charge of how you want it to feel, or you can have it completely automatic and let it decide for you as the terrain hits the units. Essentially, it's a mega system, and all right, regardless of the cost, it might not be for everyone, because some people are still going to think, well, I want to pick when I want to do it. Well, you can, but you can also pick to let it do it when it wants to do it. And knowing what the access system is already like in the way that it learns, it's going to learn how you ride a bike, it's going to learn the way that you ride, it's going to learn how you pedal. it's a brilliant system. Now, I've not even ridden it, but I already love what it stands for. Very cool, but yeah, it's not for everyone. And one last little thing they've just done as an improvement on their suspension forks is a little thing they call Buttercups. Now, essentially, they're rubber bumpers that go between the damping shaft and the outer leg where it bolts on. Think of it as a vibration damper, because one of the things that tires you out as a rider is vibration coming through to your hands. Now, yes, your tires will take out a certain amount, and your suspension units will, but just think vibration is always going to be faster than any damping unit can actually move. How do you take that out? Well, your suspension for your suspension. Basically a super soft rubber bumper made of a particular type of, I guess, like slow rebound rubber. And it takes out some of that vibration, reduces it out. I forget what I say, but it's like a big amount. It's like 20% of the vibration that would get through to your hands through the system, even with the system working, is reduced. That's got to be a good thing. Williams Racing. No, not the F1 team. This is an Australian outfit that are making and developing race-specific products, and they're doing some seriously cool stuff. Now, in particular, there's two things here, but I want to talk about their mid-mounted transmission. Now, I actually got sent this by a friend, and he was like, "Oh my God, have you seen this? Like, what the hell is going on here?" And I looked at it and just thought, it kind of reminds me of the old Honda RN01. So way back, Honda came into the mountain biking scene. They sponsored Matti Laitinen, Brenda Fairclough and Greg Minnaar, and they had a mid-mounted transmission on their bikes that was housed in a box. Now, at the time, all we knew was it was a gearbox, because they literally had cordoned off their pits races, so you couldn't see what was on the inside. And everyone was saying, "Oh, is it a gearbox? They've got planetary gears. What sort of systems on the inside?" But essentially, as we now know, pretty much had a rear derailleur and a cassette and a little chain in the inside of a box that was mid-mounted. Now that seems brilliant to me, because you're reducing the friction by not having a gearbox itself. You're still using the derailleur style system, but the derailleur is protected inside a box. You're also mid-mounting it. You've got the chain that constantly moves on the bike, so your chain tension is constant. It was a high pivot bike, but that acted like an idler with the jack shaft system on there. There's just so many cool things about the way that system worked. And these guys have basically replicated that in a homemade version using a SRAM access system. There should be a few video clips on screen of it. Now, yeah, all right, it looks a bit complicated from the outside, but you imagine if that had like a fairing over that. I reckon that is a seriously cool bit of kit. So again, they're removing the rear derailleur from the rear wheel, but they're still using the low friction design of a regular chain cassette and rear derailleur. That's pretty smart. Now, the front crank chainring there actually moves side to side to keep the chain line with that cassette, which isn't, I've got to say, if you're running in a pair of jeans or something, you might get it all caught up in all the chain, the way it works. But man, it's a cool system. And I love the fact they've developed it. Now, they've also got something else cool going on. If you look here, you could probably see that the chain is moving constantly and they're changing gears on it, but the cranks aren't moving. Yeah, that's because they've got their center hub system. So in a similar vein to the cranks we've seen from Intend, this has a similar concept. So it has two things that it does. You can run this on this bike, or you can run it on a regular crank. One of the things it will do is isolate the chain forces from your rear suspension, so almost like a decoupler. But the other thing it does, it means your chain constantly revolves. Again, you're going to need to make sure you have a fixed hub or cable tie the rear sprocket to the spokes there as a safeguard, so it basically doesn't move. And then you have this on the front, which has black oxide bearings in there or something like that, I think they said. But the fact is, it's super low friction. Your chain always moves. It means you can change gear whilst you're coasting, and you've got all the benefit in their gearbox version there of a mid-mounted gearbox system on a bike, but without the hassle of having an extra gearbox. It's cool. It's obviously work in progress, and some people look at it and just feel repulsed. I feel the opposite. There's a lot going on, but it makes me look at it and think, wow, that's really cool. And if mid-mounting a transmission wasn't enough, then how about a brand new form of transmission? So here it is from Lau Bikes. Look at this. It takes you a minute to even work out what's going on, and even then I think you probably still aren't working out what's going on. So this is what they call the Super Drive system. Now, it's a brand new concept, and it's essentially removing what the derailleur conventionally does and turning it into two different modes. So the bit of the derailleur that you can see there at the back of the bike, you notice is missing the cage, the lower cage there. So that lower cage unit that actually gives the chain tension is now at the front. It's above the sprockets there, the front chainring. The rear part of the derailleur is there for changing gears, and the front is for taking up the slack in the system. So you're removing some of that weight, you're moving it into the center of the bike. And you're also removing the part of the derailleur that hangs off the bike and can be damaged. So in theory, it's more efficient than a gearbox because it's not running, you're not turning metal cogs around in fluid, and it's lighter than a gearbox, a bit heavier than a regular transmission because you've got the extra chain and stuff going on there. There's less unsprung mass than a regular transmission, so these are all good things. Now, one of the biggest things about this, I've got to say, which, just looking at the pictures here, so the designer, his name's Cedric Evely, and he designed a system because he was looking for a way of doing this, but he had to learn to weld and design a bike in order to design a bike and weld a bike and put a bike together to hang the system on to try it out. I'm so impressed on all levels of what he has achieved, and it sounds like he's working with a bike manufacturer and wants to work with more people to see if the system can be incorporated into the way that bikes work. I mean, I think when you first look at it, you might think, I wouldn't be alone in thinking it looks a bit messy. It's because there's a lot going on, but the more you look at it, the more simplified it actually looks. Combine this with a high pivot bike, you know what's going on there already. You've got the high pivot bike there, you've got a constant chain length of where that chain line is, so you know it's going to pedal well, you know it's going to work well over bumps. There's just so much going on with the Super Drive system for Lau bikes. I just can't not be impressed. I think this is staggering that someone has literally reinvented a transmission. Way to go, and I can't wait to see where you go with this in 2022 because I'm sure there's going to be some progression coming, so let's see it. Now, interestingly, he's actually put a hydraulic style clutch into the system. Now, and his system is said to have even less friction on it than a regular transmission. Now, think about this. When you put your clutch on, let's just use a Shimano drivetrain here. You need the clutch on when you're in your highest gear, so that's the smaller size sprockets, because the chain has the biggest amount of slack. But you don't arguably need the clutch on when you're in your lowest gear, which is the biggest sprocket, because it's under so much tension. But when the clutch is on in those gears, you can feel it when you're changing gear compared to when you turn it off. Yeah, so try that if you've got one as an experiment. You'll notice as you go up into those lower gears, it becomes a little bit harder feeling at the shifter there. It's because everything is under basically additional tension, and that tension has got to have a little bit of friction on the system. I've never actually tried to measure it or even understand how to measure that. However, you can't deny there's going to be more friction. His system basically gives you less tension when you're in the lower gears and more tension in the higher gears because of the fact it uses essentially a small hydraulic damper to do that. That is just another brilliant feature of this system. Hidden shock bikes from Scott and Bold. Now, in the past, we've seen the bikes from Bold that have housed a hidden shock just in front and above the bottom bracket unit there. I've ridden one myself, and they are very, very cool bikes that are absolutely beautiful. Now, when the two brands had a bit of a merger, we kind of thought that we'd seen the last of Bold, but we'd see the Bold engineers working with the Scott engineers to produce bikes. And we were partially right, because Scott came out with the latest version of the Spark, which looked like a Bold, but in the Scott guise with Scott style features on there. Now, no doubt it's one of the boldest moves that we've seen Scott make on their cross-country bikes. It's got 120mm travel, front and rear. There is a more trail-orientated version with 130mm fork, but for 120mm travel cross-country bikes to just come out like that, it just shows how with the times they are with these things. Added to this, you've got the beautiful looking frame, which essentially, if you're wondering how it works, on those rocker links, essentially on the pivot bolt that runs through the middle, you've got a spur, and that spur basically compresses the shock internally. It's so simple. If you could see a cutaway image, you'd be like, oh yeah, why hasn't anyone else done that? It's just one of those things. Now, I'm sure some naysayers will be like, oh, you can't get to the shock to make your adjustments. But on a cross-country bike like that, once you've made your adjustments, you don't really need to make any other than perhaps adjust your air pressure from time to time. So I think actually it really does suit the bikes nicely. Now, it's got one of the Scott twin lock systems on there, but it's the latest incarnation of it. And the cool thing about this is, yeah, you can have it fully locked or fully open, but on the mid setting, I think they call it traction setting, it reduces the travel, it firms up the travel as well, and it heightens the bottom bracket. So it's ideal for climbing because you're not going to clip your feet on the floor. You still get suspension movement, basically to give you the traction that you need, but you've not got too much of that, and it's firmer travel, so you're not going to be bogging down. Just brilliant piece of design. And look at it. I think that has got to be the nicest looking cross-country frame out there. Like, I can't see anyone now with a better looking frame than that. It's absolutely beautiful. But then, out of nowhere, came the new Bold Lincoln. Now, this one completely caught us by surprise at GMBN because we were thinking, oh, The next bike, surely, that Scott are going to release will be a Ransom, using the Bold system, but Bold released the Lincoln. So this is their 150mm. In fact, there's two versions. There's 135 and 150mm, but it's a Bold. It's much burlier looking as well. It's got a bit more of their styling about it rather than the Scott Flow look to their bikes. But the same style features on there, and it's got a similar system with the 3 settings on that rear shock. It's got a virtual pivot linkage configuration, the bottom of which is concentric, and you can measure the sag externally, looking down there by the bottom bracket. But again, I think that right now has got to be the cleanest and most beautiful looking trail bike out there. Just an absolute work of art. I really love what these two companies are managing to achieve together, and I can't wait to see what Scott's next bike is going to be. Next up, going from the beautiful world of internal shocks and carbon fibre frame design to something very simple, a pair of pink rubber gloves from Muck-Off. Yeah, these things are called deep scrubbers, and they're actually a brilliant piece of tech. Now, when they first came through the post, I was like, really, a pair of rubber gloves to clean your bike? Yeah, and then I tried them, and legit, they are really, really good. Now, if you've got a set of brushes, you probably don't need these, but I've tried these at home a few times. Super good for cleaning your tyres with. Some of you might wonder why you need to clean tyres, but you should be checking your tyres, checking the casing for splits and things. But the fact is, it does make it super easy and super efficient to clean your bike. All you need is a bucket of warm water and a set of those gloves. But also, they're really good on other stuff. They're good for cleaning your riding shoes, they're good for cleaning your legs when you come home covered in mud, good for cleaning your bath, the kitchen, all sorts of other things. Genuinely, they are a great buy. They don't cost a lot of money. It's a really good bit of kit. However, when you buy a set, if you buy a set, be prepared for all the dirty comments that your mates are going to sling your way, because it will happen. And last up, the Lefty Ocho 120mm, so the downcountry fork. Yeah, okay, I've got a thing for lefty forks. I don't even have a flipping lefty fork, but there's something about them that in the tech world, they just don't make sense. They're so brilliant, they're so alien, and they're so like, why would you need to do it? And Cannondale's answer has always been, well, because we can. And I love that. I think that's just such a cool thing. In fact, I want to make a video about Cannondale with their attitude of because we can. I think it's a really interesting angle of trying to develop new stuff. But this fork, when they released the single crown Lefty Ocho, one of the coolest things about it was the team riders had actually been racing it to success the previous years with a fake 3D printed upper crown on there. So they're already running the single crown fork in plain view, but no one could ever see it because it had a fake upper crown on there. That in itself is really cool. But the fact is, a lefty single crown, well, a lefty fork with a dual crown, you look at it and it doesn't make sense. Removing that upper crown that has all the support, it makes even less sense. And then when they released the 100mm travel fork, Cannondale said, we can't make it any better than this. We can't make it any stiffer. We can't make it any longer travel. And they make it stiffer and they make it longer travel. So interestingly, even though it's got 20mm more travel, the fork itself is only 3mm longer. Here it is on screen. So it's got 50mm offset, it's 29-inch wheel only. It's designed for all mountain, downcountry and triple XC duties, whatever you want to call that. Up to 1,550 grams. So just so you get an example, that's a 32. The 34 Fox Stepcast is 1,623 grams, so it is lighter, it would be. And the maximum weight limit is 305 pounds, which I think is 135, 136 kilograms, 137 kilograms, maybe 8, somewhere around that region, combined rider and bike. But I'm sure if you're a heavy rider, be that in a physical sense or the way that you ride a bike, you might not be looking at that product anyway. Adjustable air volume on there, and there's also a gravel version called the Oliver, if that interests you, with 30mm travel for gravel fans. But I love these forks. I think it's great because it feels like it just shouldn't still exist, but it does. Tell me it's not cool in some kind of way. What did you think of the tech stuff that we've shown off in this show? Tell me what you loved, tell me what you questioned, and tell me about the ones that I've missed out. I'm sure there's some, but these are just some of the things we've seen that we've been really impressed with over the year. As always, I'd love to hear feedback, get involved down there, and we'll see you in the next video. See you later.